Land tax banned in pre-modern? The rent is too damn high.
Stop, I need more stuff. Can't see, I need more stuff. And now it goes. I'm keeping up with the Joneses. I'm keeping up with the Joneses.
Hey everyone, welcome into Eternal Durdles. I'm your host, Nate Golia. Oh my god, it's me. I'm back again. But not permanently. Zach is unavailable for today, so I'm jumping in along with Phil.
Can never have.
Yeah, there's two Phils.
Can never have too many Phils.
Yeah, too many Phils. Along with Phils is what I should have said. Would have been funny.
Okay, today, so the pre-modern format no longer has land tax, but the Eternal Durdles podcast has plenty of Phil.
Plenty of Phils. We have Phil tax. We have searched our library and found two basic Phils. That was not. That sounded meaner than I meant to.
I accept on my end at least.
But so for the listeners' edification, I suppose, last week I was on vacation in Maine. So if you're watching, you can see my new Maine hat. And Phil B had texted me and Zach and said, "Hey, I'm going to get into pre-modern. I'm going to get these 4 Mox Diamonds, 4 land taxes." And I was thinking, though, because I was on the beach and I couldn't really use my phone other than to just look at it, I was thinking, good for him, because those will be the last 8 cards that I own. They are my favorite cards. I love looking at them. I have my 4 Stronghold Mox Diamonds, my 4 Legends land taxes. I just love putting them in front of me and looking at them. And then the next day, in pre-modern land tax was banned. And Phil said, "Well, I guess I'm not going to do that." So you saved yourself $2,200.
The timing was impeccable because we had the last time Phil Nguyen was on and gave us the rundown on pre-modern, I was like, okay, I know of this format, and then Phil was talking about the format, and then we just started coming up with brews on the episode, and I was like, okay, this sounds sweet. I'm ready to hop in. And then I started watching a bunch of coverage. So Cloud Go Ranger had a bunch of coverage. There was the LobsterCon that everybody in the New York community was super excited to go to. I was like, man, I am missing out. I got to get into this format. So I start watching some videos. I see Eric Vogt just crushing over in Europe, and then Sam Black is crushing here, and they're playing Gush, and they're playing all these islands, and I'm like, this is top counterbalance, turn 1, turn 2, exactly the way I want to do it. And so I'm like, I'm getting into the format. I'm just investing. I'm here for the long haul. And then a day and a half later, they're like, actually, gone forever. So with us is Phil Nguyen. He's going to talk to us about the ban. Phil, why is the rent so damn high? Why did they ban land tax?
Well, thank you again for having me on. And it really is impeccable timing, because I think you got so many pings in the 90s MTG Discord the day that land tax got banned. Everyone was like, please stop. Don't sell out of your 401k and your retirement funds to buy these Mox Diamonds.
Oh, yeah. For context, I reached into the 90s MTG Discord. I was like, hey, if anybody's looking to move some Mox Diamonds, I am in. I'm ready to push. Yeah, and then it gets banned, and then the following day, everybody's like, wait. Just like the Tim Robinson meme. I'm trying to do something.
Honestly, though, I feel like that shows that we're a good community, and it's not like a whole bunch of people being like, just pinging you out of the blue, being like, hey, I actually have all these land taxes now if you want to buy them, just take advantage of the situation. But yeah, land tax is gone. It is no longer here. It's been kind of a topic of conversation in pre-modern for a while now, and it has gotten louder in some areas. But I think what's actually made it pretty interesting is that there was no real single reason why it was banned. If you haven't already, check out the pre-modern website. For those who don't know, pre-modern is pretty much founded and sort of run by one guy in Sweden, Martin Berlin, and his close cohort of friends and trusted advisors. And so he wrote the ban announcement, and it's, I think, pretty good. It kind of goes over the reasons why it was banned, the context for the history, the different decks it was in, the different options of cards that he could have banned instead, and ultimately arrives at the conclusion. And like I was saying, the reason why it was not such a straightforward discussion or ban is that there's a lot of tiny reasons that added up to warranting a ban. A lot of times cards are banned because they're just too good, right? That's honestly the most common reason. But in this case, aside from a few select people like Mark Eric that you talked about earlier, who He shared on Twitter his win rate with his tax rack decks, and it's just insane. He's like 90% win rate.
To be fair with
over
Mark, he is busted everywhere. That's his
It's
win
true.
rate in Legacy as well. Like that dude just does not lose.
Something
ever.
I definitely want to, yes, we want to come back to that point. But yes, go ahead, Phil.
Yeah. So yeah, we can come back to that. But in general, like the win rates for Parfait and tax rack decks are not obscene. Like you mentioned, like LobsterCon, aka the North American Pre-Modern Championships, was in June. There was almost 200 players there. I think it was like 186 or something like that. I was there as well. I was not on tax rack, but yeah, I mean there was one tax rack deck, a Parfait deck that made top 8. It was by Lanny Huang from the New York area. And so there's only one there, so it's not like it had a dominating performance. Sean Sullivan actually put together the win rates for the different deck archetypes. One of the organizers, Jared Doucette, actually shared the match info afterwards, which is really nice, really uncommon for a lot of tournament organizers. And so Sean Sullivan actually put together the win rates for the Parfait decks, and there was not, I don't have I thought I wrote it down. Oh, here we go. There's 15 Parfait players. And do either of you know what the win rate for Parfait was at North American Pre-Modern Champs?
I'm gonna guess it's gonna 53, maybe.
I'm gonna guess. I'm gonna say if we're playing Price is Right rules, I'm gonna say 48.
It was 46%.
Oh wow, okay, so I overestimated. I figured since at least one person got the top 8, that would have skewed.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, in general, like 15 players going 46% win rate is not something that most other formats would be like, wow, this is like a huge problem, right?
Yeah, sorry, I was about to jump in, but you might not be done.
Yeah, no,
Sorry.
go ahead.
Because what I was going to say was that, like, we talked about Mark Garrick being a very good player. Sam Black also, who was obviously like, years and years of pro level experience, and he was playing it, and he was saying how good it was and how, plus it was. And so I think a lot of people were saying, well, if all the best players are playing this deck, that probably means it's the best deck. And I think that's a little bit, it probably is a very strong deck. It also rewards strong play. So the thing about, I've played tax rack. I actually don't play as much Pre-Modern as I played middle school, just because I have my association with the Romancing the Stones group in Texas, and they run middle school format. But they're very similar formats, and Parfait is played in both of them. And like I've played it, and I've been like, yeah, like sometimes you have a handful of basic lands, and someone destroys your scroll. I just felt like there wasn't enough like focus on the matchup from other decks. It was just sort of like, oh, it is true that once people untap with it a couple times, you can get far behind pretty quickly. But that I don't feel like enough people were trying to stop that from happening. They were just sort of taking for granted that it was definitely going to happen. And like, I think that, very good players playing a very good deck in tournaments where people aren't really thinking about it, I thought was contributing to its sort of dominance, its perceived dominance, because if you are like, oh man, I don't know what to do here, and I haven't thought about this. I don't understand why. And 2, like, yeah, it feels terrible when the other person's drawing 6 cards a turn. And like, but it's also, it is a slog to watch. And that's another thing. Like, we had a middle school tournament where we had a Parfait player. I think the match, we were doing it on stream, and I think the match took like an hour and 10 minutes with all the shuffling and putting back. Short. I know. And so like when I was playing it, I was always very like, okay, I'm like cognizant of that. So maybe I wasn't even making the best decisions when I was using it, but I would just say like, okay, like, well, what did people, I didn't hear like I heard a lot of people talking about, oh, it's very good, it's very good. It's like, what are you trying? Like, what are you doing against it? Because like I never saw a lot of those strategic discussions. I'm not always in every group, but I am in the Pre-Modern Facebook groups are pretty popular. I never heard like, oh yeah, so like one thing you could try is like to target this, or you could play against it like this. And I just didn't feel like there was enough adoption to it as a dominant deck, and that like if you're a pro and you see that, you're gonna gravitate towards it, and you're a pro, so you are really good. So
Yeah.
to see the other players kind of, fall behind that 50% mark, I think sort of plays that out. It is not super easy, and it's not an autopilot win like I thought. Like I think some people expected it to be.
Yeah. I mean, honestly, you bring up like a lot of points that I think really show why the ban was very complicated. I mean, one is the time issue. Like, I think there's a lot of reasons to ban a card, and the time issue is hard to argue, I guess.
Mhm.
Like, I'm sure a lot of legacy players, and I'm sure Phil Blackman will have bad memories of this, but it's obviously like the Sensei's Divining Top issue, right? And that like a lot of inexperienced players who pick this up for the first time, you do spend a lot of time shuffling, a lot of time searching. There's a lot of decisions because you're scroll racking and enlightened tutoring each turn. And that does take a lot of time if you're not experienced with a deck. Like, people like Mark or people like Rich Shea and even Lanny were very fast with the deck. And, when the ban discussions were happening, they would often mention how few draws they actually had. And so it's, it is one issue, but then at the same point, Sean Sullivan, who I mentioned earlier, who did like a quick data analysis on LobsterCon, also showed that if a game went to time, it was more likely than not because of parfait. So like, it did show that there was a huge spectrum of players. And, Lanny, who's, like I said, a very good player, he had a very infamous top 8 match at LobsterCon against Goblins that lasted over 2 hours. Like, that's like kind of insane if you're a tournament organizer.
Yeah. Yeah, I know. And it is tough. Like Phil and I were at the time very much against the Sensei Dividing Top ban in Legacy, like mostly because like rounds go to time all the time. And I had played a lot of Legacy with like decks where I was like, there's no way I'm ever going to time with this deck and would be in time like 2-3 times in a tournament. So I don't like to like really focus on it as a reason to ban a card. I think that we had to talk about power level, and it is undoubtedly very powerful as an engine, but I still felt that like there's so many inflection points to mess it up. And I just didn't see a lot of adopting to that. I didn't see people would say like, oh, such and such a deck is good against it, and then you'd never see that deck. I think the Rock was like a big one for that. It's like the Rock is great because because Pernicious D just wipes out everything they're trying to do. And you get that going. Like I didn't see a lot of like innovation to try and find a way to defeat it.
I think
the other thing there was only one other thing that I wanted to mention about it too, is that I think that some of it had to do with Mox Diamond. I think that Mox Diamond, it's the second most expensive card in pre-modern. The most expensive is Gaia's Cradle. And it does suck when your opponent goes like $600 card land tax, and then like land tax is not cheap, but it's not but it's still like it's like an attainable card. You're like looking at your deck, which you maybe spent half that on like because it's pre-modern. Like you get like a Madness deck or something and get out of there for $300. And you're like, well, this sucks. Like they just like I do feel there's a little bit of like the real like bummer from the play experience was just seeing all the Mox Diamonds. And I wonder how much of that was just sort of sublimated to lane tax. So.
Well, Bill, I have two quick questions before you answer that. I just want to, if you want to tack these on as well. I just wanted to know what your like. Did you personally agree with the land tax ban or not? Because of how much experience you have in like building the community of the format, and then your thoughts on if the pre-modern community, because it's a player-run format, if they've ever considered adopting rules that are different from how WotC does their sanctioned tournaments. And the example that's coming to mind is something that we've talked about on the cast before is when rounds go to time, just the abolishing of 5 extra turns makes it so that tournaments continue to run over faster, and that draws do exist. And so that if a round goes to time, there's no additional turns. It's just a draw, rather than letting 5 untimed turns play out, where then usually you might get into the scenario where neither player can win, but they're trying to build a case for their opponent to concede, and then they waste 30 minutes and then ultimately just come to a draw anyway. But like, so if you want to answer a 3-parter.
Yeah. So, I think as far as my personal opinion on the land tax ban, I guess it's complicated. I ran like a very short Twitter poll, and it got about 240 votes, and basically 50% of respondents were happy with the ban, and 18 were sad, and 24% were mixed, and 8% were other. I kind of consider myself in the mixed camp. I think that land tax, if you wanted to only win like pre-modern and you were equally skilled at every deck, land tax like Parfait probably was the best deck. Like it's just a very strong deck, and there's no arguing that. But that's not to say that like that's not something that pre-modern couldn't have handled. I think I'm kind of in the camp of that's unclear. Like kind of Nate said, I think the community did try to address it, but I think that there was still time to address it. And it kind of depends on like how you wanted to skew your deck. Like for instance, I'll give an example. Like I think Null Rod is a very good card against Parfait, right? It shuts down their Mox Diamonds and Scroll Racks. And I don't think I saw like anyone really playing Null Rod. Like you might see like one, maybe two sometimes, but it wasn't like a very common card. And maybe it's because, you know, people are like, it's too narrow of a card, it's not worth it. And that might be the case. But, you know, I think that there was a lot of tools to do it. But I was getting worried when things started going into the more blue tax rack side. I think that is actually a lot harder to beat than the classic Oath Parfait decks, mostly because whatever answer you had would just be like countered anyway. So it was very difficult. Like I'll give a quick example. Like at LobsterCon, I played this Raging Glaciers like brew of mine. Basically, I went like 4-2-1 or something like that. And I did lose to a blue tax rack deck, and my deck plays like a lot of answers to tax rack. Like it plays 4 Nivdis, 4 Powder Keg. It plays like tons of shatter effects, 5 red blasts in the sideboard, and I like could not fit through like a single answer. Like it's really hard when they're kind of have like unlimited counter spells. So I guess in my perspective, I think I'm okay with the ban. I'm never happy about bans unless it was the Arkham's Astrolabe ban in Legacy. Like that one I was legitimately happy about, just because I'm a huge fan of basic lands. But you know, there's always going to be people who are sad about bannings. Like there's some of the top pre-modern players played Parfait, and they're understandably not very happy about this. And I think that's kind of a bummer, right? But at the same point, there's a lot of players too who are like, I'm so glad the tax rack is banned now. I can finally start playing. Like a lot of people would not play the webcam monthlies because those are untimed rounds. And they're like, I got a job, I got a family. I can't like run into tax rack and play like 3 hours, you know? That's just like not possible.
I do think that because so much of this format is played via webcam, that is that's one of those things where like, the time problem is a problem. Like just because of that. Like I said, we talked about I just remember I think we've had the player playing tax rack on stream twice, and yeah, they were such late nights because it was like a Thursday night. We're starting the stream at 8, and like it would be like 11, and we'd be wrapping up. So like yeah, I do think that sucks. I do. The only thing, you know, when it comes down to sadness,
as a control player, I do want to point out that any player can concede anytime. Like there is agency. We have control of our lives.
Yeah. That's why I was but tax rack also was a bunch of different decks. You said the blue ones were harder to beat, but they were fairly new. I had not seen them for a long. Like I didn't play that. I played Pink Prison. You had the False Cure tax rack deck too, and I well, the thing is like we're losing that. You know, we're losing that engine in a lot of ways, which like means that there's gonna be like a lot of little ideas that could lean on it. This is the argument for keeping Brainstorm legal in Legacy, and you know, but the difference is that like I do feel that land tax Scroll Rack that's a little bit more people. People be like, oh, they always have Mox Diamond land tax. Like they always have Mox Diamond land tax Scroll Rack is like their opening hand is Mox Diamond land tax Scroll Rack and another land. Like what's the other cards? Like you can't do anything between that. Like you can't find some way to interact. This thing doesn't affect the board, doesn't affect your life total. Like you gotta play a duress. I don't know what else to say. Like I'm like, yeah, sometimes they're gonna get their 3 basics, but 3 basics don't kill you. So
Yeah.
just keep them, did you try and duress scroll rack? Did you try and like play some sort of artifact destruction on the Mox Diamond? Like I don't like, I felt like people were just, it's classic who's the beatdown stuff that we've talked about bannings in Legacy. I've often said, like, like, are you trying to beat this? Like,
Yeah.
or are you just saying it's so good that it has to be beat? Now, I do want to shift away from a little bit from like the discussion about whether or not it was good.
Well, let me quickly finish some of the questions that you and Phil had asked. So like one, like one of the questions that Phil had asked about, like whether PreModern as a community kind of run format would like shift away from like WotC structure and stuff like that. I don't know if that's been like a strong consideration, honestly. I think one of the appeals of PreModern is that like established Magic players can jump in pretty easily. Like, I know that, for middle school format, you all have, mana burn, damage on the stack, and the old wish rules, which are really fun. Like, honestly, like I would prefer some of those rules, but it's also not approachable to like newer players a lot of times, and it's also not on MTGO, and so that's like an issue that some people have considered. Though I do kind of like the idea of not having the extra 5 bonus rounds, so maybe we'll think about that in the future for our own New York events. But that's one thing, and then two, just quickly wrapping up something that Nate had talked about, of just like this feel bad of, my opponent has these Mox Diamonds and I'm running UG Madness or whatever. I think that's like one aspect, but in general, like I think it's like hard to quantify how fun tax rack is. Like there's always this old joke, right? Is that like, fun is zero-sum game. It's all, subjective. Like people love playing Stasis. There's nothing wrong with playing Stasis, stuff like that. But at a certain point, like the games for tax rack did go very long. Like they don't have a very fast win condition. And that can be fun for some people. A lot of Parfait players love playing the mirror because it's like a really grindy matchup. But then also a lot of players did not like playing a 2-hour round, right?
Yeah.
And so that's a consideration too.
Yeah, the build I always played had Devastating Dreams and Mog Maniac.
Oh, yeah.
I was like, this gets to be the end of the game.
Oh, Mog
That's all
Maniac.
I really care. Yeah, there you go.
Oh, and I did want to mention one other thing, is that I think one of the reasons why people didn't like tax rack and land tax specifically is something that a lot of legacy players can relate to, which is that it created these awkward sub games, right? And that's like one of the biggest complaints about Monarch, right? Is that people are like, oh, you get the Monarch token, it's card advantage over a long period of time. But why don't you just remove the creature? Why don't you play your own creature and get Monarch too? It's like, it's that easy, right? And so
The Monarch goes into a zone that doesn't exist interactively, though. That's a little different, I think, because
one of the things I by attacking, right?
Yeah. So, well, I think one of the reasons that, like, one of the things that, I was saying when you're talking about banning is like games take too long and like people's, well, I can't play my lands. Games take too long. I'm like, okay, Standstill is going to be sucked into this vacuum. You think you're going to have fun playing against Standstill where you can't play your spells? And you're sitting there for an hour waiting for them to kill you with a Mishra's Factory.
I mean, the difference is that Landstill and Stasis, when you're in the lock, they're just like draw go. Whereas Lantex is like, okay, I'm gonna search up 3 lands, I'm gonna shuffle it back in, I'm gonna put 8 cards back, I'm gonna draw 8 new cards, and that's like fucking 5 minutes. So
I can see it so fast to stand still. I'm like, all right, forget it. I'm not gonna bother with this. There's nothing I'm gonna do here. So I guess maybe that's my thing, is I'm also like happy to concede a lot of times. And just like, this is my problem. Well, give me a pyroblast in here, The other thing was just like, the interactability, and like, the fact that it was like once they untap with it, you're basically dead. Like, also true of survival, also true of both the druids.
Yeah.
And these are going to be sucked into that vacuum too. Like it's not like, because Phil B had a question like, what decks would be like? I don't think there was any deck that was like, you can't play this deck because Parfait exists. I never really felt that ever.
Well, like, I will say one other thing that I was gonna mention. Okay, so the one thing about PreModern also is that it has a very wide meta, right? Like I play a decent amount of PreModern. I've played Parfait like a handful of times. It's not like, a couple of years ago when you're playing Legacy, and if you don't play Delver at an FNM, you're like shocked, right? You're like, what is going on, right? At least once. So I think that's the thing, is that a lot of people, I think as a community, there are obviously a lot of players who play a lot, but there's also players who play a couple times a week, a couple times a month, and playing against Parfait, I think you need to know, like you said, like when to concede to like save time. You need to know like when you should be playing a land into land tax and when you should be waiting. And if you don't get enough reps in, then it can be a very unpleasant play experience, right? And so it's possible that, like, you know, given time, people would have adapted and come up with new strategies, but you know, we'll never know.
It is a format with a huge meta. That's what, and like losing one of these engines that made the meta huge by enabling some blue decks, some red decks, some black decks, in addition, you know, that had this engine in it. Like, I feel like it's going to slice a little bit away. What was the last thing that was banned before? Was it Grim Monolith?
The last thing, let's see.
I'm trying to think. Grim Monolith.
No, is Yawgmoth's Bargain.
Yawgmoth's Bargain, yeah, which was only one thing. Like, you know, there's only really one way to build a bargain deck. I mean,
yeah, if you're not playing Rector with it,
it's just Rector with it,
yeah, you Rector into it. And I have, you know, like, I've been trying. I've got my Zoran Orbs and my Nefarious Liches, but still can't get it to be consistent. I can't even beat the Goldfish a lot of the times. Anyway, but yeah, so I mean, that's the thing. It is kind of like, well, you know, one of the reasons that this format like was kind of wide was that this engine was flexible and went into a bunch of different kinds of decks. There was Tax Rack Aggro, there was Tax Rack Controller, Tax Rack Oath, and you know, we're going to lose all those, and they're going to be replaced by, you know, existing versions of those decks, which, you know, we'll see how that goes.
Eternal Dirtles is proud to be sponsored by Moxfield. Moxfield is the best Magic the Gathering deck building website on the internet. You can create, share, and find decks from Commander to Legacy, and even fan-supported formats like PreModern and Old School. You can see all of our decks on our Moxfield. Follow the links below to stay tuned.
I was going to ask on that axis, I was going to say, hypothetically speaking, there's a player getting into PreModern who's very excited to play Parfait. I don't know who that would be, but hypothetically, that person exists. Now that land tax is banned, what direction should those players look towards in terms of having an experience for a viable control deck that does that sort of the similar play pattern of sculpting and being able to have a lot of decisions to answers to a variety of decks, and, you know, feel as though you're able to piece together any type of build that you'd want to attack a given metagame or that you expect to run into? Where would you push those players?
Yeah, I mean, I think in general, blue-white control, still a very good deck. It actually was seeing a little bit of a resurgence during Parfait because it had a pretty good Parfait matchup. And so that's actually one of the decks that people think, while still very good, may have lost some like equity with the banning. But there's two options to build it, like kind of your classic land still. Mark Ergbo was also one of the innovators behind the Parallax Tide combo that basically exiles. It's a one-sided Armageddon, basically. So that's like one option. I do think that in comparison to Parfait, it's a little bit like more straightforward, I guess, probably because it's traditionally blue-white. So there's not as much sculpting as opposed to like raw card advantage with Standstill and Factor Fiction. But still very fun, very good deck. Actually, New York has a lot of Landstill players, and so it's something that you see quite often. And actually, like for a lot of the people who have Mox Diamonds already, I think Grotog is also a very fun deck. It's not like pure control, but because of its like usage of Mox Diamond and other rainbow lands, it still has like a Parfait feel in which you can basically jam like any color combination of cards, so you always have an answer. So I think that's like a pretty good option too. And then lastly, there was, before Parfait got really big, there was some work being done on like blue-green control, blue-white-green control. So I think those, yeah. So those are also options as well that I think could be pretty interesting.
Because the one thing about Parfait being out is, like, you know, the only color required was white, which means it always had 4 Swords to Plowshares. So maybe you could squeeze some of those more creature-y style control decks, like Psychotog was basically the one I was thinking of. People said that black wasn't very well positioned. Now, unfortunately, somehow, but people love playing mono black, and so I feel like I always play against it. If I'm playing mono middle school or pre-modern, like I will play against mono black in every league. I think you hit it. I don't feel there was anything that was like I said. I'm just gonna reiterate. I don't feel like there was anything that was like really being held back, because it absolutely could not be a land tax and a scroll rack. So it's not like there's something waiting to break out. I think it's a matter of seeing where things settle, and like then adapting it from there, because it is definitely that the format. You have to be thinking broad because of all the things you said, Phil. Like it's just there's so many options for different kinds of decks, and not every deck is playing the same kind of mana base or the same kind of consistency suite. So Parfait actually gave you a bit more of a target there, because there'd be some percentage of people trying that. So I think that it'll be fun for a while. What do you think the best deck is now?
I think that Stifle Knot and Elves are probably the two best decks right now. Just rewinding a bit, I think, okay, so I would like kind of generally say that although Martin in his ban announcement said that one of the reasons the tax rack engine was too good was that it fit into too many places, I like kind of disagree with that in general. Like in my opinion, like tax rack was basically only like a prison control deck. Like sure, you did see it in some other places, but they weren't like, I don't know if good is the right word, but they were not like the best option for tax rack. Like, we are losing a lot of good decks that people played. Like, Terrageddon was a very popular deck that used land tax. It was a very good deck. And then there were random like aggro decks that used land tax. White Weenie would use land tax from time to time. Sometimes decks like Merfolk or Slivers would use it. Matt Harper had this great Draco tax rack deck, the Draco Explosion, the tax rack, that was pretty cool. And so and I know we have a lot of Mardu fans on this pod, so that was like one of the few Mardu decks in pre-modern, so we are going to lose those. But at the same point, I do think that it actually was very constraining from a deck building perspective. And I'll give you like a preview of a deck that I've been thinking about for a while, which is Zer's Weirding, which is one of the win conditions that Parfait would sometimes use. I think it's like a pet card of Rich Shays. So Zer's Weirding, if you're not familiar, I think it's like a 4-mana enchantment, and like every time you draw, either you or your opponent draws a card, you reveal the card instead, and like anyone can pay 2 cards or 2 life to put in the graveyard instead. I think it's something like that.
Yeah, each player effectively controls the other's draw step that leverages the player with more life. So when you have Ivory Tower, you're just like, all right, I will control your draw step for the rest of the game, and nothing will matter.
Yes, and it was perfect in Parfait because also land tax and scroll rack were not drawing, so you were just still like generating card advantage while locking out your opponent. Anyway, I wanted to build that Zer's Weirding that with Words of Worship, which is like an onslaught 3-mana enchantment. And it's like if you would draw a card, you can pay 1 colorless and gain 5 life instead. So that was my plan, is I was going to lock out my opponent by just replacing my draws with gaining 5 life and just using that 5 life to just bin everything in my opponents, right? And
to be honest, that sounds really hot.
It does.
Right.
I'm just gonna say that sounds hot. Yeah.
I know. So that's what I want to build, and I have a lot of great ideas for it. Like I was like, okay, I'm gonna put in like Roar of the Worm and Call of the Herd, so that even if it gets binned, I can just cast it anyway. Right? There's a lot of cool stuff to do with that. Or I was like, I'm gonna Oath of Druids into Exalted Angel and just start gaining life and locking you out. Okay, so that's like a sweet idea. But if you're in blue-white, I'm just like, okay, well, I should probably just put in the tax rack engine, right? Because it just makes a lot of sense, right? And so I felt like brewing in the white space really, the tax rack combo really stifled innovation, because you're like, okay, I have to add this in. And once I add this in, I'm literally just the worst Parfait deck, right? And so I think that with Parfait gone, or sorry, tax rack gone, people are like kind of thinking about new draw engines. Like people are talking about Sylvan Library and Abundance, which basically like, you can replace your 3 draws with the Abundance effect. So you're basically ancestraling each turn. It's obviously a lot more expensive, right? It's a 2 mana and a 4 mana enchantment. But people are talking about that, which I think is cool. And then just to wrap up, like kind of like what are the best decks? I talked about Stifle Knot. Oh yeah, that was the other thing. So the LobsterCon results. Parfait had like really low win rates across 15 players. Stifle Knot had 17 players with a match win percentage of 62%. Okay,
I also gotta say, Phil, like, the thing that gets me about that is, okay, you were upset. People were upset about people playing a 1 mana enchantment and a 2 mana artifact. Like, what are you gonna do against a Stifle and a Dreadnought? It's 1 mana cheaper and it kills you. like that's the thing. Like, you cannot interact on the first couple of turns. Like, you have to think about this format that way. And yeah, I think that we're gonna see a lot of Stifle Dreadnoughts, which means that we're gonna see a lot of fun other cards like Crumble or something like that. Like, just like we're gonna see some fun stuff to combat it. But yeah, that's the thing. I was like, I mean, it's not. I was like, man, I wish my opponent was spending their first 2 turns just putting things on the board and not playing lands. Like, I could probably figure out a way around that. Someone's gonna, because at some point they're gonna go land Lotus Petal, Phyrexian Dreadnought, and Stifle, and you're gonna be facing a turn 1 12/12, and then you get your turn, and you're like, well, do I have a 1 mana way to beat this? It's probably not. There's very few of them. Source of Plowshares.
Yeah, and the opponent has days because they always have days.
They always have days. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Oh, they always have days. Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, like Stifle Knot, Elves, and Burn are probably going to be the top 3 that people are going to watch out for.
I note that Elves was about a year ago. There was a lot of talk about banning Gaia's Cradle because of Elves. That's what kind of led me on that mock style thing. Is like, well, it does suck because Gaia's Cradle is like, a nightmare to acquire. At least there's a gold boarded version of it.
Yeah, I'm still amazed that there's no gold border Mox Diamond. That would have been so sweet. Just quickly wrapping up, Burn was one of those decks that a lot of people felt was somewhat unplayable because of Parfait, because basically they just gain a ton of life. They have a lot of basics. They can tutor for circle protection, warmth, whatever. Like people did feel like Burn was in a pretty bad place. So that was like one deck, and like you mentioned, like black-based decks like Pit Rack, like nothing feels worse than like a bottomless pit versus like a land tax. You're just like, this is real bad.
Well, you gotta play around it. You gotta duress it. You gotta put a deed in your deck. You gotta find some way to. It's out there. I don't know. I didn't.
Yeah. I mean, Dystopia is probably the only answer to answer a land, or I guess a Nib disc.
Well, another thing, actually, you mentioned when you were talking about decks you're building, like there's a lot of enchantments that are really powerful in this format, and we are at this point in history, there has not been a lot of enchantment removal. I had so, and that was one of those things where it was like, well, I was playing, I'm playing Parfait, and I'm like, I gotta have a Burning Wish target that destroys all enchantments, because what if I can't beat Parallax Wave or a Survival of the Fittest? And I was like, it's gonna kill my land tax, but like it's important to be able to beat these cards. And I'm interested to see, because like, some of the argument was like, well, land tax is hard to remove. But
it's hard to remove. It was hard to remove profitably. Like any deck could have removed it eventually, but the concern was by then they had drawn like 6 new cards and just played like another land tax. Yeah, and that was kind of my thing too with the blue tax decks, is that like they just always had an answer to your answer first, because they got the card advantage. So that was, I think, kind of the hard part.
Well, we've talked a bunch about this banning, and I have a lot of fun discussing PreModern. There's so many interesting things. You're like, it's always a lot of play. Remember this card too. I did want to just mention one thing to both of you, and I wish Zach was here. I unfortunately couldn't make it, but we're playing this middle school tournament. I'm in the middle of one now. I'm actually 1-2 with my Goblin Bombardment Gamekeeper deck. I won the first round handily. I was like, this deck is so great. I'm such a genius. I can't believe I invented this idea. And then in round 2, my opponent played an Armageddon, and I was like, well, that sucks. I can't beat that. And then in round 3, I flooded out horribly. Like, ironically enough, I had enough to hard cast my Symbiotic Worm, and I died. But anyway, but I'm having fun playing it. I think that's a fun deck. But another enchantment, by the way, that, you know, if a Goblin Barb hits the table, you probably lose. And not talking about my deck, and John was saying, like, if you ever see one of those in play, you got to do something about it. But anyway, so we're in the Discord after the tournament, and this guy Casey from Nashville Old School Tournament was saying we're running old, like, I guess we call it classic, or I forget what they call it, Alpha to Scourge. Like, it's a replication of the vintage format in 2003. And I said, you know what, that does sound like a little bit of fun. I could get down with some of that. I could use some of my CE cards I haven't used in a while. I played Old School in a bit. So yeah, man. And he's like, okay, great. Yeah, just, you know, he just offhandedly said, go to the source and look in the classic forum, like the archives, you can find some deck ideas. Like, great. So I go, and it's the not the source, I'm sorry, Managing.
Yeah.
And you know, it actually does, they have like an archive form that ends in about December of 2003. So it's like right around the same time. It's after Mirrodin comes out. But it got me to thinking about something. In Magic up to 2002, right? And then in 2002, Onslaught is released. Okay, that's your fetch land. That's the introduction of fetch lands. End of that block, Scourge, introduction of Storm. Then the frame change and Mirrodin. And Mirrodin brings in Chalice of the Void, and then Affinity. And then in Darksteel, Trinisphere comes out. And I was just thinking, like, we talk a lot about how the rapid changes in Magic these days with Fire Design, all these things, and Lord of the Rings, all this stuff. But I was like, man, that is I wasn't playing then, but it must have felt insane. Like, you know, you suddenly have, especially if you've been playing, you know, Type 1, like up to the end of the Odyssey block, everything's sort of the same. Like, you had the Urza block thing, but that was just like, that was sort of like understandable brokenness, if that makes sense, you know? Like, there's nothing about the Urza block brokenness that wasn't like understandable in the context of Alpha up to Tempest. But like, you know, the fetch lands completely change how you build mana bases for the rest of Magic's existence. And then Storm is like, you know, obviously this format, this is now like the engine combo kill. This is it. There's nothing else. There's no more, you know, and nothing is better than this, more compact. And then, but when Mirrodin comes out, not only do you get the new frame, which is jarring, but like Chalice and Trinisphere, those are defining cards that's about 20 years ago this year, you know? And I'm just wondering what you guys thought about that. I don't know, Phil, were you playing during that time?
I wasn't yet, but the way that you explained how those cards came in, I always think of the history of Magic and my experience with it in terms of, like, there were set checkpoints that like sort of changed the game forever. And of course, like, fetch lands being introduced inarguably changes the game forever. And the other, like, similar spots in Magic's history are, like, at least for legacy purposes, Innistrad was very clearly that for me. You know, that was like the moment where we saw Grizzlebrand introduced, Miracles introduced, Thalia introduced. You know, we got
Faithless Looting.
Faithless Looting was introduced. Like, there were a lot of things that like sort of that overhauled what the format really looked like.
Delver Secrets.
A lot of wheelies.
Well, forgot that one.
And then that, like, updating it again, I think of it similarly with War of the Spark.
Yep.
And then War of the Spark sort of like changed the entire era, where now we are effectively a rotating format as opposed to a format that, you know, just acquires a couple of cards here and there. People will, you know, pick up certain strategies and try and incorporate it. It's like, no, like, there's going to be playables and like significantly impactful cards in every set. To keep up with them. So I think of it like that way. So it's cool to do a little trip down memory lane like that, to be like, yeah, the Scourge was one of the original, like, checkpoints in Magic.
Yeah. Oh, I was just gonna say, sorry, Phil. I was just saying, like, which is interesting because, like, we were talking, Phil N was talking about new players and stuff, right? And one of the interesting things, like, Phil, have you played a lot of Old School?
Me, I played some amounts. There's the Sisters of the Flame here in New York, and they're really great guys. I played with a few times, and it's definitely very fun. I have a few decks. Yeah.
But I guess what I was just saying is like old school. It's fun. I enjoy it. I'm old. Like, but like it is like unrecognizable. But pre-modern and middle school, like they're sort of like recognizable as Magic as you understand it today, with how mana bases are built and the kinds of cards that you're looking for. The one thing I've noticed that came much later after our 2003 era was like just being able to cast stuff for free, like not specific cards, like you get to cast a random card for free with all these effects. That's a thing that doesn't exist in middle school. And also things that like create value off you just doing regular stuff, like that's not as much around middle school, but it's still like there's still some of it with threshold and things like that. And there's even things like flashback, which sort of replicate that cast randomly. But anyway, I was just saying like it's recognizable as a game of Magic today. But I was just thinking like it's recognizable because of that 1 year at the end of it. Like if we decided that if they had changed the card frame with Onslaught, pre-modern would be a really interesting format, because they would have, these would all be pushed forward even more. But yeah, I just think I was kind of chuckling and thinking about like, man, I if there had been podcasts back then, we'd be like, what are they doing? They put these things in and they put this format, and now they're changing the frame, and now this card just counters everything, and these cost reducers, like, yeah, I mean, it was a lot, but we just, you come in, I had stopped playing before that and came in afterwards, and so I just sort of metastasized all of it as new stuff. But Phil B, one thing that you missed was Lorwyn, because I think Planeswalker is being introduced.
Oh yeah, of course,
huge
yeah.
one.
Yeah, that's arguably one of the biggest shifts ever, right? And it's like understanding how to push Planeswalkers as like different enchantments. Your take on like how crazy this stuff is. Anytime there's a discussion about like, imagine if you can recall when this happened, how crazy everybody would be if something like that happened now. It always makes me think of P. Sully's discussion about when TNN came out, and he's like, everybody's up in the air about TNN, and then he's like looking at Wasteland, and it's like, if this was reversed, if TNN had been around like all that time and Wasteland came out, everybody would be losing their shit about Wasteland. And it's like, so there's a modern bias of like hating the new thing as opposed to the thing that you're just like accustomed to.
Well, one of the other things that happened in 2003, actually with, I believe, the Mirrodin release, was, Storm had just existed, and I forget what the deck was called. I think they just called it Burning Long. This was the vintage Storm deck, the first vintage Storm deck, and it got whacked immediately by bannings. Like they banned, or restrictions. They restricted Burning Wish. I should look it up. I know Burning Wish being the big one that was restricted.
Huh.
And at the time, they were talking about the upcoming ban restricted update on Mana Drain, talking about this. It was like, will they unrestrict Berserk? And people were saying, oh, you can't unrestrict Berserk. You'll have like, you'll have like Berserk Rancor. It kills you with I forget what the 3-power card was. It's like, it's funny to think about that. Like, yeah, I mean, Berserk is a very powerful card that has a very strong niche, but the idea that like it was unrestrictable, you could never imagine. What if someone had 2 of them? It's just kind of funny, and not in the folk idea of what would come later. And of course, I'm sure that after that, I think Trinisphere got restricted when Fifth Dawn came out. Like, it was so destructive to Vintage with Workshop. It took another 15 years or 12 years, however it is, for Child's Crusade. I don't know. It's a very interesting year thinking about, like, it didn't have, Storm was just like, oh, like, it's a combo deck with one name. It's not a Storm deck, which we would recognize now. But anyway, I had a lot of fun reading that. If you get a chance, you can go and read those forums pretty easily. There was someone brewing a Zoo deck in the post-restriction world, which maybe I'll play in that old frame tournament. Because it's a lot of fun.
Yeah, I have played Old Frame before, which is, I think, what you were talking about.
Yeah.
Which is just like Alpha to Scourge, and I played. What did I play? I played Distorting Lens Reap.
Oh yeah, I've been trying to build that in pre-modern, but I can never get it to work.
I have some lists to send to you. I'm not going to say they work, but I have tried to.
Well,
I'll say they work.
We'll work on them.
Yeah.
Well, you got to see. I got the Nefarious Lich stuff too. I got to show you.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
And there was also, I have been playing a little bit of this format called Classic Legacy.
Mm-hmm.
And I know like these like time capsule formats are sometimes controversial, but it's been fun. Basically, it's like Legacy up until I think the last set was like Rise of the Eldrazi. So it's not quite pre-Innistrad. It's like one set or one block fewer than it.
New Phyrexia would also not be in it, which which was a complicated set because of the Phyrexian mana.
Yeah, that was one of the reasons why that particular group stopped it there. But it's kind of run out of Spain, and they've organized a few like webcam leagues now. It's also been very fun. I'm building lands there before Thespian stage, so it's like Mindslaver and like Creeping Tar Pit kills.
Yeah, I mean, Thespian stage is one of my bugaboo cards too, where I think people don't underestimate how stupid it is. Like, just like, oh, like my opponent did just put cards into play and now I'm dead. Like, this sucks. Like,
Debatable.
How are you able to play this? Are you able to? How are you doing with your two kids? You know,
oh man, it's busy. Like, I'm only in one. Like, I skipped the PreModern monthly last month, and this month I skipped it as well. But I'm in this like Necro PreModern league, which is basically like, what if Necropons was unbanned in PreModern, which is maybe unlikely now that land tax was banned. Like, it would be kind of weird to be like, we're banning land tax, but we're gonna unban Necro.
Especially Dark Ritual's legal.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, but it's been fun. I'm 3-1 in that with this False Cure brew, which of course I had to try to do. But
yeah, I just want to call out that you guys are, of all the people that I know in all of the world, you are the two falsest curious players that I'm aware of.
You know, I haven't tried it in middle school yet. I'm gonna have to take a look. I don't think middle school gives you anything that. Oh, Mystical Tutor, right?
No, Mystical Tutor's not legal.
Oh, never mind.
Yeah, I mean, what's not to like? That's.
Oh yeah, I agree. Also, Phil, speaking of Mystical Tutor, every other PreModern podcast that I've listened to talking about the land tax ban, at some point, Mystical Tutor comes up as a point of discussion for something to come off. Where do you stand?
I think I'm open to it. I think so the thing with the PreModern ban list is there's actually a few cards that people suspect would be okay. Mystical Tutor is probably the number one, along with Entomb, that people think would be okay to unban. Some people think World Court of Dragon could be unbanned too. The two most controversial that people think may be possible are Yawgmoth's Will and Necropons. Those obviously have like a very storied history. Yeah, some people are like very, very skeptical, but maybe. But I think basically any one of those cards would probably be okay. But if you unban one, you would never be able to unban like the others. So like you kind of have to choose which one you want. Like, you know, we've talked about, I would love Mystical Tutor to be unbanned because Predict is literally my favorite card in Magic. So in a Mystical Tutor world, Predict is just like amazing. So we'll see.
I'm looking at the ban list right now, and I mean, Necro is interesting. Like, it's legal in middle school, but Dark Ritual isn't.
Yeah.
And, you know, even then, like, I beat it in the first round.
Yeah.
Like, I'm like, oh, okay, like, you please take all this life, and then, you know, bolt. Like,
yeah, that's the thing. Like, Burn is so good.
Yeah, Burn is really good in all these parts. Well, the slide decks are really good. Yeah. And also a couple times where I've seen it in play, it's just kind of boring. Like people will be like, okay, I got my Necro into play, but like you tapped out for it. And they're drawing a lot of cards, and because they're paying life and they're not getting their draw phase, their turns take a lot longer. I've noticed, and because they're facing like, oh, am I gonna get like burned out here? I think Necro, especially since Tendrils of like, here's some other things that are on the ban list: Tendrils of Agony, Vampiric Tutor, Demonic Consultation, Grim Monolith, like Mystical Tutor, Time Spiral, Windfall, Yawgmoth's Will. Like, you know. Necro is a really great draw engine. Do not get me wrong, I'm not saying it's a bad card, but like, if you take it away everything that makes it really scary, which is that it can kill in one turn, I don't really think there's much to fear, and it might be like a fun little thing to have for their decks.
That's the thing of like why I was interested in this Necro league, is that like whenever we talk about unbanning Necro and PreModern, people are like, you cannot do that. It's an insane card engine. What happens if you get it turn one? And then I'm like, okay, well, what is the win condition? And people are like, oh, I don't know, you can do anything. And I'm like, okay, but specifically, what are you doing? And and it's
I've had this
often
discussion about
people-
Legacy.
Yeah.
Oh, what are they turn 1 Necro in Legacy? I'm like, okay, then what? That you pay how much life, and then your opponent does what? Like, they could do a lot of things. They could needle your Necro. First, the pretty needle on Necro would be, it's never, I don't, maybe it's happened in Vintage, but that's gotta be like just the worst feeling. Just never drawing another card. I don't know. I've thought that too. It's like all the other real dangerous things that make it dangerous are gone. So
yeah, but quickly wrapping up there. That's not to say that I think it's like a safe unban. Like I think it could definitely be broken over time. I'm just like not convinced that it's not worth looking into. But I will say, my false cure deck is not good. Like it's fine. But yesterday I did have a turn 2 on the play win with a first turn Necro in which I had mulled to 4. So that felt pretty good. So but it's not common.
It's not common though, right? Yeah.
No.
Actually, False Cure is probably the best existing deck for it, because you can actually sculpt a hand that's just Necro, or I'm sorry, from the Necro, where it's like a False Cure and then a bunch of the what's that, Sky Shroud Cutters or something.
Yeah, you still have to pass. You still have to pass the turn though, because you can't cast them instant speed. So that's the thing. Is like, okay, I do all that, and my opponent's like, Cabal Therapy, False Cure, and I'm like, okay, let's go to the next game.
Yeah.
Yeah, right, exactly. Well, that's all I had to say about this banning. I do think, well, I mean, I think it's it's nice to get to talk about these formats. At some point, we should talk about the appeal of these formats. Like Phil, you mentioned like a couple other ones you've been trying. I have some thoughts on that as well, but I do know we all have to go to work. So thank you for coming on.
I do have a few last quick call outs. So if we do this alternative formats, I need to pitch Universes Beyond 93, 94. My pet project of old school plus Universes Beyond cards. I think there's a huge population of people who are nostalgic for Chun-Li kicking a Ancestral Recall.
That'd be very
that's
funny.
one.
Yeah.
2 other things. One, I gotta give a shout out to Rafael Caron, who is the first person to invent Parfait. He invented it for Vintage. He came to PreModern, started building it, and he's like one of my favorite deck builders. Like, he builds all sorts of stuff. I actually played him when he had a banding deck in PreModern, and he beat me with it, which is kind of fun.
Oh wow, the origin of MTG banding.
Yeah, my villain story. But yeah, he's definitely played a lot, built a lot of really cool Parfait decks, and obviously this banning is a big loss, but he's definitely a great player and builder. And then the last thing I wanted to call out is that New York is hosting a PreModern tournament in September, September 16th. It's going to be a 1.5K cash tournament, and so it should be pretty good. We're throwing it in Manhattan, and if anyone is interested, you can visit mtgnyc.com, and there'll be the details there.
Also, just to note for that, it is partially proxy, right?
You can use gold border cards.
Gold border, yeah.
Yeah, collector's edition, international's edition, or even the anniversary cards, if you have those. I don't think I've seen one of those in person yet, so if anyone wants to bring one, feel free.
Yeah, I haven't either. All I know is that they used it as an excuse to why Star City was like, we can't buy your CE stuff because
wow.
I was like, look, it's never going to be 1994 again. So that's the one thing that CE has over 30th anniversary. Like, this is actually from 1994. So
it's never going to be 2023 again. So,
Yeah, but it's going to be 2020. It's going to be 2023 forever at this rate.
Yeah.
Thank you,
Sounds
Phil.
good.
Thank you,
All
Phil.
right. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, guys. Cheers.
Thanks.
Hey, thank you for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Check out this other video, and if you can, please support us on patreon.com.